Muhammad Ali is fighting a return match with Ken Norton, breaking his jaw in that last fight. Would you welcome our good friend?
Do you remember that night when Ken Norton stepped into the ring to face Muhammad Ali?
We talked a lot during the fight. That was part of the game. I think he beat you mentally.
And smashed his jaw, handing him his second loss in the process and sending ripples through the world of boxing? We boxing fans sure love an upset, and Norton certainly provided us with an almighty one that night. And this is the story of how it all went down. Ken Norton was always destined to be an athlete. He was an accomplished runner over several distances and was also selected to turn out for his all-state football team. This led to him being offered a football scholarship, which allowed him to attend Northeast Missouri State University to study elementary education. On leaving college, he enlisted in the Marines, and during his service, he discovered he also had a talent for boxing, winning 3 All-Marine heavyweight titles on his way to compiling an amateur record of 24-2. This convinced him to turn pro, and on doing so, he quickly began racking up the wins in the professional ranks too. However, despite early success, few people would have picked him out as a future great, and his progress was checked in his 17th fight against Venezuelan boxer Jose Luis Garcia. In that bout, Norton suffered a shock 8th-round KO to a fighter who achieved little else of note in his career, and this didn't bode well for his future in the sport. But after the loss, he went on a winning streak that took his professional record to 30-1. And then came his date with destiny when he was chosen as an opponent for Muhammad Ali, and the rivalry they went on to share would come to define the rest of his career. At the time, Ali was in the process of rebuilding his own career, having spent 3 years away from the sport due to his refusal to be drafted into the Army, and then suffering a loss to Joe Frazier 3 fights into his comeback. If you want to find out more about the rivalry between the two that defined the era and changed the trajectory of both of their careers, make sure to check out our last video. After his loss to Frazier, Ali had put together a respectable string of wins, and a rematch with Frazier along with the highly anticipated matchup with George Foreman were already on the horizon. In this context, the fight with the unfancied Norton was seen as no more than an easy tune-up fight for the former champion, and it was a bout he was expected to come through without any problems. Despite his decent winning record and contender status, Norton had few names of note on his resume, so he was a huge underdog going into the fight, and bookmakers had Ali as a 1-5 favorite. Perhaps the only man who gave Norton any chance was his friend and sparring partner Joe Frazier. At that point, the only man to have defeated Ali, but not many others could see anything other than a simple night's work for Ali. But when the two stepped into the ring together, things didn't quite go as planned, and their clash, although not easy on the eye, turned out to be an unforgettable classic in terms of the high drama it delivered. Following the first bell, Ali was noticeably sluggish from the outset. Norton, on the other hand, was a man possessed, and he advanced on Ali relentlessly, confounding Ali with his jerky movements and unorthodox style, connecting with powerful blows and shrugging off most of what was coming back. As the fight wore on, those watching started to realize that a huge upset was unfolding before their eyes. And when the judges' scorecards were read out, Norton was awarded the victory by split decision. Having taken a battering over 12 rounds, Ali was magnanimous in defeat, shaking Norton's hand after the scores were announced. It then emerged that Ali had suffered a broken jaw during the fight, and when journalists tried to interview him, he could be heard groaning in the background as his handlers told reporters he couldn't speak. The shock was immense, and it was a result that almost nobody could have predicted. Like many, renowned sports journalist Howard Cosell had considered an easy Ali victory the only possible outcome. And when interviewing Norton after the fight, he remarked to him, "Kenny, you made me look silly." To which Norton produced the memorable retort, "That's okay, Howard. You always look silly." But how had this happened? How could a relatively unheralded prospect upset the self-proclaimed greatest in such emphatic style? The post-mortem began immediately. First of all, it's clear that Ali had overlooked Norton, and Ali's considerable ego had contributed to the loss. Norton was not unknown, but he wasn't a famous name, and Ali hadn't trained properly. He turned up overweight on the night, and during the broadcast, the commentator revealed that Ali had even been spotted at a party the previous evening. Now, there was no claim that Ali had been drinking or misbehaving, but the fact that he was spotted out at 1 a.m. the night before a fight certainly doesn't present the image of a fighter locked in and ready to do battle. And then there was his ankle. Ali later revealed he had sprained his ankle a week before the fight, clowning about on the golf course. This had hindered his final preparations for the bout and possibly also reduced his mobility in the ring once the action got underway, which may account for his sluggish start. But worse was to come because once the fight began, Ali suffered the injury to his jaw. At first, it was reported that his jaw was broken in the first round, but although Norton's corner claimed it occurred towards the end of the fight, Ali himself later confirmed that it happened in the second. After the fight, the doctor stated that his jaw had been broken in several places and the sharp edges were poking into his cheek and mouth. As a result of this injury, Ali was spitting out large quantities of blood between rounds, and the discomfort it caused him must have been considerable, even if afterwards Ali denied that he felt much pain. After this, Ali was forced to fight defensively and was unable to commit to attacks because he was afraid to leave his jaw unprotected, putting him at a serious disadvantage for most of the bout. He also claimed that his right hand went in the sixth, so not only did he have to spend most of the fight protecting his broken jaw, but he could also only throw meaningful punches with one arm. So despite taking an L, this first battle with Norton must go down as one of Ali's bravest performances. And the fact that he fought Norton to a split decision, despite having a broken jaw and a damaged hand, only adds to his myth and legend. But that's not to take anything away from Norton. Norton considered himself extremely lucky to be given the Ali fight, even if there were no titles on the line other than the North American Boxing Federation belt. As a result, he was determined to make the most of this opportunity to change his life, and he threw himself into his training. He also credited his win to a motivational book he had been given called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. He claimed that reading this book gave him extra confidence and inspired him to think positively, so he wasn't intimidated by Ali and his customary trash talk. Instead, he took the fight to the former champion as soon as the first bell sounded, catching Ali by surprise. In the aftermath, criticism of Ali was harsh, and there were those who were ready to write his career off, saying he was done. Ali, though, true to form, was defiant, and despite having his jaw wired shut, he let the world know in no uncertain terms that he would be back to get revenge over both Norton and Frazier before knocking out Foreman in the 13th. In the end, when the rumble in the jungle with Foreman finally took place, it took him until just the 8th to finish the job. Classic Ali, right? Norton, on the other hand, had, in just one night, transformed himself from fringe contender to one of the most talked about fighters in boxing. And unlike others who make a name for themselves with an unexpected victory only to throw it all away, yeah, we're looking at you, Andy Ruiz, Norton was set on making the most of his newfound status. Immediately after their fight, a rematch was planned, and in under 6 months, Ali and Norton faced off once again inside the squared circle. For Norton, this high-profile and lucrative rematch was his reward for the stunning upset he had caused, but for Ali, it was a contest he simply had to win. With hindsight and knowing about the fights that were still to come for Ali, it's hard to imagine now, but in the second Norton fight, Ali's career and legacy were on the line, and he risked jeopardizing the upcoming monster fights against Frazier and Foreman if he lost. So having overlooked Norton in the first fight, Ali left no stone unturned in his preparations for the rematch and showed up in exceptional condition. And yet despite this, Norton came agonizingly close to doing the unthinkable and defeating Ali a second time in an intense and competitive bout. The fight went the distance, and when the scorecards were read out after 12 rounds, Ali was handed the victory by split decision. So Ali emerged with a win, but Norton had every right to feel aggrieved because on another night, the decision could easily have gone the other way. Despite losing, though, his stock remained high, and next he was given a shot at George Foreman for his WBA, WBC, and ring titles. In the event, he was soundly beaten, losing by technical knockout in the second. But even so, he had established himself as a serious fighter and would continue to mix it at the top of the division for several more years. Having suffered back-to-back defeats for the first time in his career, Norton again put together another winning streak that included a creditable win over Jerry Quarry, in which he regained the North American Boxing Federation belt. He also scored a victory over José Luis Garcia, avenging his earlier loss to the Venezuelan. And then it was time to face Ali again in the rubber match that would decide once and for all which of the two boxers would come out on top. The fight took place in the Yankee Stadium in New York, and by this time, Ali had recaptured the WBA, WBC, and ring belts after defeating George Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle in Zaire. But with Ali visibly on the decline and appearing to have lost some of his former speed and footwork, the matchup would turn out to be a brutal 15-round war. During the fight, Ali never stopped trying, but he got his tactics wrong, and by the end, most observers had Norton a clear winner. And yet somehow the judges didn't see it that way, because when their scorecards were read out, the win was awarded to Ali by unanimous decision. It was an astonishing result that went down as one of the most notoriously controversial decisions in boxing history. And afterwards, even Ali and his trainers admitted they thought they lost the fight. In New York at the time, there had been a police strike, so perhaps we can say that the lack of police presence in the stadium contributed to what many consider a robbery. Amazingly, going into the 15th and final round, Norton's corner told him he had won it, and that all he needed to do was stay out of trouble. But had he pressed and taken the final round, he would have been awarded the win by split decision. That's how close he came. Following the second close decision against him, Norton became disillusioned with the sport, and although he fought on, he lacked the motivation to train to his full potential, so the rest of his career turned out to be a mixed bag. He secured a victory over the highly touted, undefeated Dwayne Bobbitt by first-round KO, and he then defeated Jimmy Young in a final eliminator for the vacant WBC belt. He should then have fought Ali for a fourth time for the title, but Ali lost to Spinks, and Spinks chose to rematch Ali rather than defending his belts, so Norton was upgraded to WBC champion. Ali himself was not interested in facing Norton again. Norton lost the WBC belt in his first defense in an enthralling 15-rounder against Larry Holmes, and then fought 5 more times, winning twice, losing twice, including a first-round KO defeat to the big-hitting Ernie Shavers, and drawing once. He then retired from boxing with a final record of 42-7-1, with 33 of his wins coming by way of knockout. Ken Norton died at the age of 70 in September 2013. Without his fights with Ali, far fewer boxing fans would remember his name. But with his awkward, unusual style, he gave Ali 3 of the hardest nights of his career, thus securing his own place in boxing history. Having defeated Ali in the first fight, and then visiting him in hospital where he was recovering from his broken jaw, Norton earned Ali's respect. This meant the build-up to their other fights didn't feature the usual trash talk and insults that were customary leading up to most of Ali's contests, and Norton was spared the kind of acrimony and abuse that Ali saved for the likes of Frazier. Ken Norton was not one of the top boxers of his era, and it has been suggested that he struggled with big hitters like Foreman and Shavers, who both defeated him convincingly. However, he made the most of his talents and still managed to capture a version of the heavyweight title before he retired. But above all, he was the man who seemed to have Ali's number, and both losses could easily have gone the other way, so perhaps it's no surprise that Ali swerved him when the idea of a fourth fight was floated. Kenny Norton will always be remembered as Ali's nemesis, his kryptonite, and his 3 closely fought battles with Ali were enough to see him inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. And it all started that night he answered the call, fearlessly stepped up to the plate, and broke Ali's jaw into pieces. What do you think about the controversial decisions in the second and third fights? Should Norton have been given the decisions? And was he Ali's hardest opponent? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let us know by leaving a comment below. And if you like this video, please don't forget to drop us a like and follow us if you haven't already to support us in making more boxing content like this. See you in the next one.